Thank y'all for joining us. We're going to very briefly go over the policy and procedures manual and state employee handbook revisions that are becoming effective July 1st of 2025. Feel free to stop and ask questions along the way, or I've got a slot at the end to answer questions if you have any. So we're going to dive on in. It's 9:05. So we're going to discuss some revisions to some of the policies regarding our legal services contracts and contract workers and things like that. There was an update to the designees section of the policy manual. There was some edits to the administrative leave, remote work, and retroactive pay. We're going to touch on all of these. So for the legal revisions, there were revisions to judicial review, contract workers, and legal services contracts. This is not my area, nor the vast majority of y'all's areas besides contract workers. So we're not going to discuss all these changes today. They were in the red line versions. And you are free to review those with your attorneys and reach out to our SAG if you have any questions regarding changes to these policies. Agency designees. All right, so section 1.6 of the policy manual. Our policy manual now requires that the person with signature authority to sign on behalf of the agency head needs to be a person who's in a position for your agency. So this is just from a protection standpoint. If you're going to be binding an agency, we feel like you need to be a state employee. And so if you're not, if you have a retiree on contract or something like that, they cannot sign and bind the agency anymore beginning July 1st. It will need to be somebody in a full-time position at the agency. So we'll also have put into policy that you do need to designate someone as your training contact if it's different from your HR person. No agency, no contractor may be the sole agency contact to discuss personal matters or trading information. And any communication between staff and an independent contractor must copy the agency's official designee. So that's something our attorneys asked for in order to, if we're going to be binding an agency, it needs to be a state employee of that agency binding that agency. Is basically the reason for that revision. Admin leave. In section 3.2, there's a provision that now requires that an agency use intermittent remote work in lieu of administrative leave for eligible employees. So bad weather, an ice storm, tornadoes, no water, things like that in your building, no air. If your employees can be remote rather than on admin leave, agencies are requiring that, our agencies are now required to allow intermittent remote work in lieu of administrative leave for eligible employees. With this, we are asking that y'all report this to us once a month. If you did have to close an office and you allowed people to remote work rather than putting them on admin leave, we're trying to get some good data in place for the inevitable telework, remote work bill that's going to come up again next session to show that, well, rather than putting all of these people on leave and not getting any productivity, we were able to save the state this many hours of productive work in a remote environment. Also inserted a requirement that agencies report each month the total of admin leave and the reason for the leave. We've been asking this for several years now. We've now made it an official policy. I know MMRS is working on a report that you can run yourselves to show you the admin leave that was granted. We're working with them that they've about got that report done, but it'll give you a list of every employee who was put on admin leave in the past in a designated time period, as well as the usual reason codes for admin leave, such as jury duty and things like that. So we've been asking for this for several years now, but we've now officially put it in policy that it's a requirement. Remote work. As you will see, we've taken the word telework out of every one of our policies in the handbook, and are redefining it as working remotely rather than telework. So we're going to call it remote work from now on. The templates are being updated, things like that, to allow for or to reflect that. But so remote work, we did a much better job of putting this stuff in policy. In the handbook, there was a very, very long section on remote work. And we removed the majority of it because several years ago we revised the handbook and policy to not have duplicate information in both. And we tried to keep the handbook to be just relating to employees and the policy manual to relate to agency HR staff. So we removed the majority of the agency definitions and things like that from the handbook and moved it to the policy manual. And in the handbook, we added a few things, just basically that they must follow each agency's individual remote work policy, and put in the handbook that it's not agreeable if you have remote work and it's removed or reduced, that is not agreeable or appealable action to the Employee Appeals Board. In the Policy and Procedures Manual, there's a new section in Chapter 6, which is 6.6, that covers all of what was in the handbook for remote work, as well as added a lot of other stuff, informational type definitions to the remote work policy. So we define remote work, full-time, hybrid, and intermittent. We're the things that are in the template that we were requiring based on the code section that's repealing June 30th will now be in our policy. And we inserted some reporting requirements. Again, we're trying to get some good data to show the benefits of this. And so your participation in providing this information is incredibly helpful in that endeavor. So agencies, you must have a remote work policy. This is something that was very, very much discussed during the entirety of this session, even leading up to the session back in November and December, that every agency should have a policy in place for remote work, even if you don't allow it, for the instances of if another COVID were to happen, or a natural disaster, or if you work in Jackson and don't have water or AC or bathrooms, things like that. Again, your policy must have procedures in place to protect any privileged or confidential information. And all of your employees must sign an agreement regarding the schedule, the protection of information, and any protocols for accessibility to coworkers and clients and any other appropriate matters. Your remote work policy must establish work schedules that ensure your office is adequately staffed in compliance with state law. State law requires that public offices be open to the public from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. So your remote work policy for your individual agency needs to allow for that. And it's the appointing authority's responsibility to ensure that all employees are adequately performing their responsibilities of their jobs, whether they're working remotely or in their state office. So remote work that's why we're trying to get rid of the telework, because it's not just working from home. Remote work is when an employee performs any function of their job outside the physical confines of the state office building, including reading emails, Teams messages, and things like that on your cell phone related to state business before or after business hours. I don't know how many of y'all get phone calls after 5 or before 8 or on Saturdays and Sundays, but anytime you take a call, a Teams message, read an email, you are performing remote work if it's before 8 or after 5, Monday through Friday. Full-time remote work is when an employee performs all functions of their job from somewhere other than the physical confines of the state office building. There are very few of these on a statewide basis, but they do exist. But that's the definition of full-time remote work. If an agency wants to classify an employee as full-time, the state personnel director and his designee must approve that classification. Approval of full-time remote status is not required for any employee who reports to a state office building sometime, even if most of the work is performed remotely, such as law enforcement inspectors or highway maintenance workers. Hybrid is when an employee has days scheduled to work within the physical confines of the office and scheduled days to work remotely. This is where the vast majority of our agencies fall, where they have some set number of days per week or month that an employee can remote work and a certain set number of days where they have to be in the office. Again, this is just providing a definition for what we mean when we say hybrid. And an agency, you needs to make sure that your office is staffed for the public during the working hours defined in statute. Intermittent remote work is when an employee works primarily from the state office building, but may work remotely due to unforeseen or foreseen circumstances. As long as an employee can perform the essential functions of their job outside the office, the employee should be classified as eligible for at least intermittent remote work status. So again, if they're required to be in your office 40 hours a week, but then your building loses power for a day and a half and they can perform the essential functions of their job somewhere else, they need to be flagged as intermittent, because if the need were to arise, you could put them on remote work status rather than putting them on admin leave. You receive laptop, cell phone, tablet, iPad, whatever it might be, you should be classified as eligible for intermittent remote work. Agencies can allow employees to work remotely due to unforeseen or foreseen circumstances. And again, like we mentioned in the handbook revisions, you should consider using intermittent remote work in lieu of administrative leave if the employee can perform the essential functions of their job outside the confines of the state office building in which they're assigned. By December 31st, 2025, so you've got 8 months to figure this out. All agencies under our purview must certify that their current policies related to remote work comply with the Policy and Procedures Manual. You've already certified that they complied with the statute, but since that statute is repealing, we're giving you time just to update your policy to anything that may need to be revised. Each agency that allows an employee to work remotely must submit to the state personnel director a copy of the remote work policy. And then you need to flag them in Employee Central as either full-time, remote, hybrid, intermittent, or not eligible. Agencies reporting one of the following for each employee system is either no, they're not allowed to work remotely, not eligible based on job duties or other factors. So other factors would be disciplinary type reasons or medical type reasons, things like that. So in addition to, like I said, job duties, it's going to be really hard if you're a correctional officer to monitor prisoners from your house, right? So they're not eligible for it. Yes, full-time, they never or rarely report to the state office to perform all or most of their duties at an alternate approved location. And then they need to have a copy of their remote work agreement attached to their profile in EC. Yes, hybrid, this is again going back to scheduled days in the office, scheduled days out of the office, and they need to have an agreement on file in EC. And yes, intermittent is again, they 99 times out of 100 will perform their job in the office, but if there were a need for them to work from home, they could. And they need to have an agreement on file too. Any questions on all of that remote work stuff? All
Hey
right.
Ryan, this is Susie.
Yeah.
I've got a question on the remote work. At one time, and it was back in the COVID time, it was, and I don't know if it came from SPB or whether it was an internal thing for our program, but their homes were supposed to be inspected to make sure if they were doing remote work that there were not any hazards at their house that would cause workers' compensation issues. Is that something that's required to also add into the policy, or is that not?
So there is nothing that was in statute or in our policy that requires an inspection of the alternate remote work site. I
All right,
think it's
thank
I think it's addressed in the template. If
you.
I'm going off, again, this is somewhat outside class comp and recruitment, but I think it's in the template that when the acknowledgement, basically, I think it's the acknowledgement that their work site will be safe and secure and not have hazards.
Yeah, I
But
think that I think I did see something that's mhm. Okay.
Miss Robin,
I got two questions for you, Ryan.
sure.
When will EC be updated to change the language from telework certificate to remote work?
Um, Not sure. To be honest, I can get them to change that pretty quick, but I did not think about that. So thank you for bringing that up. But I will make a note that we need to talk to MMRS about that.
Okay, and then in that same regards, will there be a way for us? How will we have to report when people are on remote work in general, or is it only if it's for a special circumstance in
Only
this
if
monthly report?
all we're asking you to report on from a remote work standpoint is if you let them work remotely where they would have otherwise been on admin leave.
Okay,
And I'm sure we're going to have a format or something for y'all to submit that to us, but that will probably come from our communications office at some point soon.
okay, thank you.
Miss Vicky.
Hey Ryan, I just had a question, also kind of touching on reporting. Will there be a sparse code added for like a work code where we can kind of, I guess, help in the reporting, pulling the reports?
So you talking about for the specifically the remote work in lieu of admin leave?
Correct.
So we've kicked that around over here, and I'm not sure if MRS can do it. I'd have to talk to them about it, but it's one of those that if we uh, um if we sorry if we did that, you would have to manually go add every time you sent someone home on intermittent work in lieu of admin leave. And I know a lot of agencies um, do positive reporting on their timesheets, and to manually go change every one for one day rather than just saying, I had 100 employees and I was able to, and we didn't have water today. So 80 of them were able to work remote rather than being on admin leave. So we did 80 employees at 8 hours a day. That was 640 hours of admin leave in lieu of it because it's not going to change how they're paid. And so we can certainly explore that if the group wants us to, but from a timesheet standpoint in sparse, I don't know how efficient that is. Again, we're not asking for, it was 437 and 3/4 hours. We want y'all to help us ballpark get a good idea of how much we're saving the state by allowing intermittent leave rather than admin leave. I hope that answered that. All right. Maureen's got her hand up first, and then Miss Latoya. Go ahead, Maureen.
Hey, just a quick clarification question for definitions so that we make sure we classify our people right. If we've got people who are not assigned, who are assigned to like a public office, but not a state office, for example, our youth service workers, I mean, not youth service workers, our social workers that work with the youth courts.
Yes.
Okay. Are those going to be remote, or are those, for y'all's definition, or are those going to be people who are just working normally at the office?
They're normally at the office, but if they could work from home, if the court didn't have power, then they should be probably intermittent.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure. All right. Thanks.
Yep.
That's all.
When we say state office, we mean their normal office they show up to every day where you expect them to be.
That's
Thank
what
you
I
for that
thought.
clarification.
Just
Yeah,
wanted
thanks for that clarification. That's exactly right. Latoya,
I think you kind of touched on my question, Ryan. My question was like if our air goes out in our building and we send 80 people home to work, the report that you all need, it wouldn't list, you said a brief description of why the remote work was granted in lieu of administrative leave. It wouldn't list each 80 people individually in a description of why each one. Will we just lump it all together and say, hey, we had 80 people work from home on this day?
well, so when y'all report admin leave now, y'all don't have to give us person by person. Y'all can say we had 3 employees have jury duty this month. We had 2 employees do X. We had 3 employees do Y. You know, and
Okay.
so I don't think we're looking for a person by person admin leave in lieu of or intermittent leave instead of admin leave. I think we just want to try to get a handle on how much more productivity we're getting by not doing admin leave, not a person by person.
Okay, and that kind of goes into my second question for jury duty. We started reporting jury duty under admin leave. Should we break that back out and put the actual code for jury duty that's in SPARS when we have someone on jury duty?
That's up to you. I know MMRS, I've seen that we're finalizing that with them, a report that it'll be an admin leave report, and that one of the reason codes for admin leave is jury duty. So if you want to use that report and track it, then yes. But how y'all track it, this is just that report is another tool. We don't really care how you track it as long as you're tracking it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, Ron.
Good morning, Denicia.
Just so you know, the options are available in EC for each of those. It's just the header, it still says telework.
Got it. Yeah, I'm gonna talk to the MRS people. I want you to shoot them an email once we get off this call. That just changing the header shouldn't be that big of a deal. All right, the last topic is, I didn't change the header, but it's retroactive pay. And this policy, as far as I can tell, has been a policy since at least 1999, and we haven't necessarily enforced it. But in section 5.2.3 and 5.3.2, it states that actions should be entered prospectively. And so what our attorneys have done, and what I say our attorneys, we've worked with them. Beginning July 1st, every transaction will need to be prospective in nature. So you can't decide on April 30th that you should have promoted somebody on April 1st. It will need to be prospective to the next pay period. So if you're monthly, it'll be the first of the next month. If you're bi-monthly, it'll be the 16th of the first. And then if you're bi-weekly, we'll figure out what the first day of the next pay period is. And all transactions will need to be entered in prospective for the next pay period. We have been talking about retroactive pay for 3 or 4 years now, and it's gotten to the point where we have serious constitutional concerns about the vast majority of the ones we're getting on whether they should or shouldn't be paid, because it's not allowed by the Constitution. And some of our administrative errors are they're not administrative errors, they're people errors. And so we are going to start enforcing this policy on July 1st. That every action, promotions, title changes, in-range adjustments will need to be prospective for the next month or the next pay period. All right. Questions. I see Latoya, is your hand still up or is it?
No, it's not.
Okay, all right. Maureen, is your hand still up or just a new hand up?
It's a new hand up. I just
New
wanted
hand up.
to clarify real quick. For the change with the, sorry, my brain is tired. Retroactive. Does that mean we have to have it entered by, like
Yes.
if, okay,
Yes.
it doesn't mean it has to have, the full process has to have been completed.
No, correct. Yeah, that's a good
Okay,
clarification.
just wanted to make sure.
Yes. Ms. Robin.
What about July 1 changes? We can't enter
July
in June.
1, so July 1 changes, they, right now in EC, they can be future dated. If we get back to SPARS and what that looks like, I'm not real sure. But right now, you should be able to future date things for July 1st. In June. Ms. Crawford.
Good morning, everyone. Does the remote work agreement remote work agreement have to be updated on a yearly basis or just once?
That's a fantastic question that I don't think I know the answer to. Anybody from the personnel board know that answer? How often should the telework acknowledgement be updated? All right, Anithya, I will get you an answer and we'll get that out with the request. I'm not aware of a policy provision, but we will include that answer in the when we send out the recording of this. How about that?
Okay, thank you.
This
Yes,
this is Kelly.
There we
on
go.
That. Yeah. It is the intention is that as long as that employee works for you and is bound by your policy, we just need to know one time. And your overall policy, as long as it complies, once you tell us that, we're going to presume it complies until we hear differently from you. A lot of this responsibility is on you as the agency. And so we're not requesting once a year. Is once that person agrees to it and it's in full force and effect from the agency standpoint, you don't have to update.
Thank you, Kelly.
Miss Jessica.
Hey.
Hey.
If a supervisor selects an employee after conversion shutdown, you're saying we can't hire them until August? Like if they're selected June 15th, we won't be able to enter them for a prospective date.
We'll work with you on that. All right.
Okay.
We'll work with you on that. Most of what we see is not that scenario. Most of what we see is we decided on April 30th to do something for April 1st.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
So that's we can work with you on that.
Great.
Miss Christie. Hearing, and I saw you unmuted, but I'm still not hearing you. All right, we'll come back to Christy. Wayne Williams.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm not 100% certain I understand the perspective entry, but my question is for board approved positions like executive director,
Sure.
where you have to have approved minutes before you can enter a salary change. If the board doesn't meet again for several months, does that mean that you can't enter that salary change other than effective after that next meeting?
So that gets gray, especially when you have boards that only meet once a quarter, for example, and rather than monthly. We can work with you on that, but there would be nothing that would prevent that board from having a special call meeting telephonically or over Zoom or Teams to approve the minutes, in the interim as well. That's an option as well. But we can work with you on that.
Okay.
Christy, you back or you still efforting? Why don't you throw it in the chat and we'll see if we can't get it answered. Hey, Katie, you up?
I'm up. Can you hear me?
All right. Yes.
My programs may tell me this isn't an issue, but I wanted to ask just in case. I know a lot of times with new hires, in particular support care professionals, the number expected to come in their first day of work versus the number that show up can be vastly different. So is it the preference that we add those new hires ahead of time and then the method for deleting them out if they don't come?
So new hires are the one exception to this policy because
Okay.
the policy also says that the new hires effective date will be the first date they begin work for both promotional and non-competitive new hires. So we can work with you on new hires. I mean, ideally, I understand these you make offers to 15 people, 12 accept and 4 show up. I mean, especially for support care professionals and some other jobs like that. So I don't want you entering in 12 and having to go flag 8 as no shows. So the day of is fine. The day they actually show up is fine for new hires. Shelly, how far in advance can we enter a future hire? It's my understanding there's no limit in EC to how far in advance you can actually key a future hire in. Regarding the retro actions, does this only mean actions for August 1st need to be entered before August payroll runs? Are you saying that? Yes, I'm saying the second part. If you want something effective August 1st, it needs to be entered in July. Will there be exemptions for NSP certifications to be retro for this or for the same month? Can you clarify that, Lindsay? Christy, on the new remote policy, we send MSB our updated policy and have our employees sign updated form. Does MSB want copies of the new form? If the form is changing, you'll need to upload a new copy of the form to the profile in EC. If your form already complies with the new policy, then you don't have to get a new form or upload a new form. Right, yeah, the one the employee signs, the acknowledgement form. If they've already signed a form and that form still complies with the policy, then you don't need a new form. But if it doesn't, you have to update it and they have to re-sign it, then yes. All right, going back up. Lauren, entered in July for 8/1 effective date or just entered prior to the August payroll date? No, you cannot enter an 8/5 for an 8/1. You need to enter it before 7/31. We sometimes get CSM certifications the same month we would award an in-range. I think we're going to have to, same if they were to get their master's degree or anything that wasn't MSP specific, it would need to be effective on the first of the next pay period. Has the conversion date for 2025 been established? We've had some communication with MMRS about this. Right now, we don't we don't see a need to lock you guys out earlier than we have to. And so right now we have not set a date. We're trying to wait to see what happens with the timing of a special session. And so until we have that settled, we don't want to lock you out on June 17th if we're not gonna have a special session until June 25th. You know what I mean? There's no point in locking you out if we don't know when we're gonna have that special session. So we're still very much playing that by ear. There's not a lot we can do without appropriation bills. So I feel like Glenda raised your hand, but Terrence has a question. MDOT crew. Look at y'all looking so pretty.
That's correct.
Well, besides you, but go ahead.
2 questions.
Yes.
First questions. Will there be some definition truly of what a retro request is if there's a lot of issues with it?
Beginning July 1st, the definition will be if it's not keyed in prospectively, it is retroactive.
That works. What concessions will be given if you have a ton of actions to do? Will there be some concessions? When you
But let's just say MDOT decided they were going to give all their maintenance techs 2%. You should know that well in advance, right?
Given the state of the budget, maybe not.
Maybe not. So we might be looking at August 1st instead of July 1st. I mean,
But they
so
all have to be entered for that date. There would not be concessions because it's a ton of them. Just say you work with me.
probably not. We can have that conversation, but I would just right now. Our attorneys have some serious constitutional concerns with even things being entered in the same month of payroll. Entering on the 2nd for the 1st because we're going back in time. So that's the constitutional concerns or what is driving this more than anything.
Okay.
All right, Miss Brewer and then Miss Dodd.
Hi, Ryan. I've got a brief question about when is it that we should expect to be able to know how much our salary budget is for the next year? Because at least this past year, and of course, this last year was my first time to be the agency head, so it's the first time that I've had any exposure to it. I didn't even get a figure till the last week of June. And, by the time we could get raises determined, we were already past July 1st.
Sure. And this year's different because I don't, a lot of y'all have called and reached out about this and we don't know. I had somebody ask me if I'd bet a paycheck on the next 7 weeks, which week would I pick? I'd probably pick June 23rd if I were picking a week. If I'm just, I don't know that, but so July this year is going to be weird, because there's a real possibility we won't have appropriations until the last week of June. And so again, this is the policy, but we don't have to be, we can work with agencies, especially this month in July, knowing what appropriations time frames are going to look like.
Yeah. This is Kelly.
If I may, let me follow up with just another question. Let me ask from a clarification standpoint, so I know moving forward. When is normally the process? Is it not that our appropriation goes to the personnel board and the personnel board determines what our salary appropriation is going to be, and then that comes back to who?
No, ma'am. So
that's not okay.
No, we wish we had that much authority. Maybe we don't.
We do not.
We do not. Yeah, we do. Kelly definitely doesn't.
Okay.
But the legislature is the sole appropriator of money. And so they ask us for reports for projections and for payroll runs and for things like that. And then they set what they want to spend or what they want you to spend based on those reports. So they don't ask us, they tell us. And just, I mean, for the record, we're the same way. We don't get to tell them how much our budget should be. They tell us what our budget should be. So we don't have that authority to set that number.
Okay.
And this,
Well, that's certainly been miscommunicated to me then. So I'm glad to hear that from the horse's mouth. Thank you, Ryan.
yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
This is Kelly, and this is just practical advice related to personal services next year. Is I would target August 1st for pay raises across the board if you have the money and things of that nature, as opposed to generally July 1.
Okay.
I have no inside knowledge other than 30 some odd years of dealing with the legislature. And the last time this sort of happened in 2009, if I'm right, 8, 9, somewhere around in there. Practically, is going to be August the 1st before you would be, any of us will have a handle on what we're getting. But each agency is, like, to each agency is your own determination. But from an HR standpoint, I would raise my hand and said, if discussed amongst the executive team, is raise your hand and say, give us August 1st instead of doing this July 1st.
Vicki.
Hey, Ron, good morning. I just have one
morning.
quick question.
Sure.
When we do the hire in NeoGov or the promotion in NeoGov, sometimes it may be a little delay when it crosses over through API to EC. Is NeoGov going to be the official entry date for the
Yes.
action?
Yes,
Okay.
we will honor the date that you actually keyed the hire into NeoGov, yeah, or
Okay.
promotion. Said hires the one exception of this policy, but for promotions, if you keyed it in timely in NeoGov and it just took a minute to crosswalk, then that'll be okay.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right, back over to the chat. Audrey Carter asked, what is the cutoff date for ending personnel actions with an effective date in a current month? I'm going to assume we're monthly payroll. All right. And if it's monthly payroll, the cutoff date for the current month was the last day of the last month. So today is May 8th. If you want to do an increase, you decide today to do an increase, it would be effective June 1st. There is no date in the current month. Vicki, the entry date applies. Sorry, we just answered that one. All right. Can we remove an approved full-time remote employee from that status at our discretion? Or will that have to be signed off by our agency director? That would be whatever your internal processes are. We don't get involved in y'all's determination of remote statuses. Kelly just has to sign off on anybody who's going to be coded as full-time remote. But if somebody's full-time remote and y'all decide they shouldn't be, then that's a conversation internally with your agency. And if your agency head wants to sign off on that change, then that's fine. But personnel board is not involved in that decision-making process. Our employees finishes BSc on February 7th. We don't get the report until March 3rd, but under the new rules, we have to wait till 4/1 to enter the in range. I will say this, Lindsay, yes, but I will talk to Michael about seeing if we can't push that report out quicker once those have been finished. And if our agency is bi-monthly, approved for employer receive a promotion on 5/6, for example, the promotion will be effective 5/16. Maybe 5/16. It's the first day of the next pay period. Thanks for clarifying that, Gwen. Yes, it's the first day of the next pay period. So I use monthly because that's all I've ever known. But I know there are biweekly and bi-monthly people, so it's the first day of the next pay period. That gets me caught up in chat. All right, guys. Well, that's all I got. And, as appropriations progress, we'll be having a VCP training to cover anything that may come out of the special session. But you'll get more information about that. Like I said, more information from communications about reporting formats for this type of this stuff. And then we will have, y'all are aware, but the maternity leave section, our statute passed this session effective for January 1st. So there will be policy revisions sometime in September or October for January 1st. And we'll do another update for that one as well. But that's all we have for right now, unless anybody has any more questions.